This is my first video update coming to you from Athens, Greece on this Thursday morning. Let's talk about some news, and let's start things off with Elensky, the Ukraine president. He is doubling down on his belief that it was a Russian missile that hit Poland, not a Ukraine missile, even though the entire world, the entire planet has now come to the understanding, after looking at all the evidence, the fragments, everything, they've all understood and they've all come to the conclusion that this was a Ukrainian S-300. This was a Ukrainian missile that hit Poland. Elensky, because his Air Force commander is telling him, Elensky refuses to admit that this was a Ukrainian missile. And he was actually speaking to reporters the other day in Kiev. And he doubled down on the claims that this was a Russian missile and not a Ukrainian missile. And let me actually pull the quote from Elensky as he was speaking to reporters. He said, "I have no doubt that it was not our missile or our missile strike." He noted that this is what the Ukrainian Air Force commander told him on Tuesday evening. And Elensky added, "It makes no sense for me not to trust them." Elensky also then said that the incident that took place in Poland was yet another argument for NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. So basically, Elensky is saying, look, my commanders, my Air Force commanders told me this was a Russian missile. This is a Russian missile. And then he, you know, then he went into a back room and partook in his favorite hobby. But yeah, Elensky's the only one that is still buying this Russian missile hit Poland. Even Joe Biden, when he was told by reporters that Elensky continues to believe this is a Ukraine missile. This is what reporters told Biden. They said, Elensky believes this is a Ukraine missile because his commanders told him, he believes this is a Russian missile because his commanders told him it was a Russian missile. Even Biden said, and I quote, "This is not proof." Even Biden is like, Elensky, just because your commanders tell you this was a Russian missile, this is not proof. This is not proof. Mr. Biden, Mr. President Biden, you have to whisper. When you whisper, Elensky takes you seriously. You have to whisper. This is not proof. So that is what is going on with this missile from Elensky's side of things. And of course, he's calling for a no-fly zone from NATO because he wants that no-fly zone really, really bad. But I believe that NATO should not impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Obviously, if NATO put a no-fly zone over Ukraine, that would mean World War III. But what NATO really needs to do, what they absolutely must do right away, is impose a no-fly zone over Poland, because Poland needs help protecting itself from Ukrainian aggression. So it doesn't really matter, though, who fired this missile, where this missile came from, whether it was Ukraine or Russia or the United States or Germany. Who cares? Because at the end of the day, it's Russia's fault. And that is the statement coming out of Lloyd Austin. That is what Lloyd Austin said. That is what the Biden White House said. Here is their statement. Whatever the final conclusions, it is clear that the party ultimately responsible for this tragic incident is Russia, which fired missiles specifically designed to hit civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Ukraine had and has the right to self-defense. So it's Russia's fault. Even though it was a Ukrainian missile, it is Russia's fault. And absolutely, I believe Ukraine has the right to self-defense. Absolutely, 100%, no doubt about it. But Ukraine doesn't have the right to lob missiles into Poland. That's something Ukraine doesn't have the right to do. It has the right for self-defense, but it doesn't have the right to fire missiles off into Poland. Now, of course, the missiles landing in Poland, it was an accident. That's what we're being led to believe, and that is what I believe, I would say. It makes the most sense. Russian missiles were coming towards Lviv. The S-300, two S-300 missiles were launched because they have to launch two missiles. That's how the defense system works. The two missiles were launched, and they failed to intercept the Russian missiles, and they just kept on going and going and going. And from what I understand, There is, from various experts, they tell me that there is some jamming mechanisms which jams the S-300 missiles so that they don't intercept the Russian missiles, and obviously the jamming technology worked, but the missiles, the Ukrainian missiles, kept on going. They missed the Russian missiles. They missed intercepting the Russian missiles that were heading towards, most likely, Lviv. That's my best guess. And they kept on going, and eventually they landed in Poland. This is an accident, but two things to make note of as all of this went down. The first thing that I find very interesting is that from my understanding, NATO and the United States, they were on these missiles from the very get-go. They had these missiles tracked from the very beginning, from the minute they were launched, these Ukrainian S-300s, from the minute they were launched all the way to the time that they hit Poland. The US and NATO, they were tracking the missiles' trajectory. So they knew that these missiles, the US and NATO surveillance, they knew that these missiles were Ukrainian, that landed in Poland. But for some reason, for some strange reason, the mainstream media was allowed to run with this Russia attacks Poland narrative for many, many hours. Almost 24 hours, they were allowed to run with this narrative of Russia has attacked Poland, even though the collective West surveillance, the US and the NATO surveillance, they knew from the very minute that those missiles landed in Poland, they understood that these missiles were launched by Ukraine, that these were Ukraine S-300s. So they had these missiles tracked from the very get-go. That's the first thing to make note of. The second thing that I find very interesting is that on the Tuesday when all of this went down, on the same day that all of this happened, a certain CIA director paid a visit to Elensky in Kiev. That CIA director is Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns was in Kiev on Tuesday meeting with Elensky. And this has been confirmed by the Washington Post and the AFP, and they are citing officials familiar with the matter. And they said that Burns reinforced the U.S. commitment to provide support to Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. And this is what an official was quoted as saying to the Washington Post and to the AFP. So on the very same day that all of this happens, on the very same day that the collective West mainstream media is left to run with this narrative, with this story that Russia has attacked Poland, Article 5 situation, World War III scenario, the CIA director was in Kiev meeting with Elensky. Was this an accident? Probably. This was an accident. Did the collective West, did the CIA, did they manipulate this accident? The Pentagon, NATO, did they manipulate this accident so that they could, I don't know, fearmonger some more? Perhaps secure another $37 billion in U.S. funding to Ukraine? Perhaps secure more weapons and more air defenses to Ukraine? Did they capitalize on this accident in order to achieve those goals? Absolutely. And did they use the mainstream media to delay, let's just say to delay the actual facts of this story and push out a fake narrative so that the $37 billion and the fear-mongering and the weapons could all get tied up and approved to Ukraine? Yeah, 100%. And that is exactly what happened. $37 billion more is going to Ukraine, which brings the total now to, I don't know, $100 billion, 90, what did I say yesterday? I said 91 billion, 97 billion. Okay, minus all the FTX money that gets funneled to Ukraine and then gets funneled back into the United States. Let's just say 100 billion now has gone to Ukraine. Lloyd Austin, he had a meeting, a Ukraine contact group meeting with General Mark Milley yesterday. And he spoke to his Ukrainian counterparts, and he spoke to all of his NATO allies, and he also secured a whole bunch of weapons and air defense systems that are going to Ukraine. Absolutely. This entire incident, even though they knew what happened from the very beginning, they manipulated the accident. This is my opinion. They manipulated the accident so that they could achieve various goals. I mean, Burns said it. What was the quote that he told Elensky, according to the Washington Post and the AFP? He reinforced the U.S. commitment to provide support to Ukraine. How do you reinforce the commitment to provide support to Ukraine when you have an entire public suffering from Ukraine fatigue? Well, how about a little bit of Franz Ferdinand, World War III, Article 5, fear-mongering? How about that? And that's exactly what happened. So there you have it. That's the incident with the Polish missile that landed, with the Ukraine missile that landed in Poland. And I mentioned that Austin and Milley, they had this contact group meeting the other day where they announced that they're going to be giving Ukraine a whole bunch more weapons, as will all the allies. They'll be giving Ukraine all of these weapons. And of course, because of everything that happened with regards to this missile strike, they now have to give Ukraine even more air defense systems, because the previous air defense systems are working so well, which they're not, because the Russians are hitting any targets they want throughout Ukraine, and they are dismantling the Ukraine electric infrastructure.
Air defense capabilities are becoming critical for their future success. An integrated system, an integrated air defense system, an integrated air and missile defense system is what is necessary as Ukraine repels Russian aerial attacks. And a significant portion of today's conversations in today's meeting with almost 50 countries focused on how we, as a global coalition, can provide the right mix of air defense systems and ammunition for Ukraine to continue its control of the skies.
And after this contact group meeting between Milley, Austin, Ukraine Command, NATO Command, you had Mark Milley change his tune, and he told reporters that the United States will now be funding Ukraine and supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. As long as it takes. He said that repeatedly throughout this press conference. As long as it takes, whatever that means. Here's Milley actually saying the United States is going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, even though the U.S. is now $100 billion in the hole with Ukraine, and God knows how much more in weapons deliveries. Here is Mark Milley.
And we, the United States, are determined to continue to support Ukraine with the means to defend themselves for as long as it takes. But at the end of the day, Ukraine will remain a free and independent country with its territory intact.
So that is Mark Milley, General Mark Milley, who is saying that the United States will support Ukraine for as long as it takes, when 3-4 days ago, it was Milley who was saying that the United States and that Ukraine should capitalize on what happened in Kherson and on the fact that winter is coming, so that they could take a winter freeze, a winter pause in the hostilities, and use that pause to come to some sort of negotiated settlement. Now you have Milley saying that the United States is going to be in it for forever, for infinity, for as long as it takes. What exactly is victory for the United States when they say for as long as it takes? Well, it's not. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has to do with regime change in Russia. That is what Milley means when he says for as long as it takes. Not for as long as it takes for Ukraine to win the war. For as long as it takes to achieve regime change in Russia. That is what Milley means. And Milley also said to the press, he also made the claim that the Russian military, and I quote, was hurting really bad after 9 months of war. And he said that the Kremlin has failed to achieve any of its goals. And it depends what those goals are, General Mark Milley, because Milley said that Russia will not be able to militarily conquer all of Ukrainian territory. That is what Milley told the media. He said there is zero chance that Russia will conquer all of Ukraine militarily. He made it a point to say militarily, but You know, those aren't and those weren't Russia's goals from the very beginning of this special military operation, which is still going by the name of special military operation. And Russia's goals, as laid out by Russian President Putin on February 24th, were demilitarization, denazification, and the protection and the liberation, the protection, the safeguarding of Donetsk and Lugansk. Those were the goals on February 24th. The operation is still a special military operation to this very day, 8 months later, and nowhere in those goals that Vladimir Putin laid out, or that the special military operation has laid out, was the statement, the policy that Russia, the objective that Russia was going to take over all of Ukraine militarily, and that is what Milley was very careful to say. Militarily, Russia will not be able to take over all of Ukraine.
Ukraine's a pretty big country. This is not a small piece of turf. And the probability of Russia achieving its strategic objectives, of conquering Ukraine, of overrunning Ukraine, the probability of that happening is close to zero. I suppose theoretically it's possible. Maybe, I guess, but I don't see it happening militarily. So I just don't see that happening.
But if the money runs out, if the weapons run out, well, then you're going to have a Ukrainian government collapse, and then you're going to most likely get a government that is friendly to Russia. Right? The minute the money runs out, the minute the Elensky regime collapses, that's when you get a change in government, and that's when the Russians can put in place a government or an administration in Ukraine that is not antagonistic, that is not belligerent to Russia. So that is why it is so important to keep the money flowing to Ukraine. You got to keep the money flowing. You got to keep the weapons flowing. Not for a victory, but to make sure that the Zelensky government does not collapse. A war of attrition on all fronts, especially on the economic and on the financial front. So they need to, the collective West, they need these World War III moments. They need these scares. They need to have these moments every now and then, because it's these very moments that scare the population into approving another 37 billion, into approving more weapons for Ukraine. Russia attacks Poland, 37 billion, air defense systems. A day later, well, it wasn't really Russia, it was a Ukrainian missile, but it doesn't matter because Russia's still to blame. 37 billion is already there, the money is already there, the weapon's already there, mission accomplished. So that is what is going on in the news with Ukraine, with this missile strike on Poland. I think that'll be the end of this. Objectives have been completed with regards to the money and the weapons. And next, they're going to move on to the next thing now. Let's do a clown world here. This clown world will be about Biden's birthday, which is coming up on Sunday. And Peskov was asked, the Kremlin press secretary was asked, if Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to be wishing Joe Biden a happy birthday. And this is what Peskov said. He said, quote, "If I'm not mistaken, there are no such plans." That is what he said with regards to Biden's birthday, which is on November 20th. So that is the clown world. Not much of a clown world, but hey, Russian President Putin, according to Peskov, will not be wishing Joe Biden a happy birthday this Sunday. Greece's favorite son, Joe Bidenopoulos, will be celebrating his birthday. That is the video, everybody. TheDuran.locals.com. We are also on Rockfin as well. And go to the Duran shop. Where is it here? Right here. Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.